She turned her attention to the other tower, glad that the massive door to it was not locked. Here a different sight met the girl's eyes, and again she faintly heard the plaintive cry. Maybe the person in trouble is in here, she reflected. The stone tower was hollow and only dimly lighted by a window high up. A circular iron stairway led to a half balcony at the top. Nancy looked around on the ground floor but saw nothing. As speedily as possible, she ascended the steps and found a little door at the head of them. Cautiously, she pushed on it and peeked beyond. Would she find anyone there? As her eyes became accustomed to the somber light, she saw that there was nothing in the tiny room, nor on the open parapet beyond it. In disappointment, Nancy leaned on the wide rail. All this work just to get a view, she thought ruefully, but at least it gives me a better idea of the place than I got from the plane. That cry, though. Suddenly her attention was drawn to a running figure in the distance far below her. Nancy strained her eyes to see who it was. Oh my goodness, she exclaimed with a fearful pang of conscience. Beyond a boundary wall of the estate, a boy was crossing the beach toward a boat, and behind him, trailing in the sand, were George's hiking clothes. Chapter 11. Locked in the Tower. As Nancy watched from the tower balcony, the boy accidentally dropped one of the garments on the grassy sand by the riverbank. George's riding pants, the girl thought in dismay. Nancy was too far away to call to the boy. She saw him dart to the water's edge, jump into a boat, and row away. I never should have left George alone at the tool house, she blamed herself. Realizing that she must do something at once to help her friend, Nancy retraced her steps through the balcony to the stairway, ran down the steps, and raced to the courtyard door. When she tried to pull it open, it would not budge. She yanked and yanked. Finally, the disturbing realization came to her that someone had locked it. She was a prisoner in the tower. Oh, I must get out, she told herself. Nancy refused to allow herself to become panicky. Surely there must be some way to get out. Returning to the open parapet, she looked about her. It was a 40-foot drop to the ground and far too dangerous for her to attempt. Thoroughly discouraged, the girl went down to try the locked door again. As she twisted the knob, Nancy thought she heard the sound of voices. Her heart leaped. 2 men were just outside. They were coming nearer. We'll get caught, I tell you, one was arguing in a loud voice, and if we are, the old man will say he never saw us before. Oh, quit your worrying, the other growled. Just leave the brain work on this job to me. We'll find that clue yet. It's somewhere in one of the walls on the estate. Yeah, which wall? The first man asked sarcastically. The place is full of them. Anyhow, I'm satisfied with what we found already and kept for ourselves. When he sees all the walls we've blasted, he can't deny we did a pretty good, thorough job for him, the other snickered. The voices faded out, and Nancy guessed that the 2 speakers had moved away. Who were the men? The voice of one was entirely unfamiliar. Though she could not be sure, she thought that the other man might be the one whose motorboat had crashed into her own. Though she had not heard him speak at the time of the incident, this man's voice was certainly that of the person she had suspected and spoken to near the dock. Nancy was sure he was the one for whom she was looking, even though he had denied it. Well, that proves a few of my theories, the girl thought grimly. The walls of Heath Castle and the gardens had been damaged deliberately and on orders from someone who wants to find a clue. Evidently, those men have located something of interest too. It could be the missing half of the note I picked up, or it could be something connected with Walter Heath's experiments, or it could very well concern Floriana. Hoping to catch a glimpse of the men, the girl returned to the parapet and watched eagerly. She did not see them, but a moment later she heard them whistling and calling to the dogs. Then all became quiet again. They've gone, Nancy thought uneasily. Maybe I should have let them know I'm here when I had the chance. But no, they're not honest, and they probably would have ruined all my plans. I'll get out somehow. The girl was in a predicament, nevertheless. George, stranded without clothes at the tool house, could not help her. Bess, so far as she knew, was waiting in the parked car outside the castle gates. Nancy roved restlessly about the ground floor of the tower, searching vainly for an exit. To add to her dismay, she was very hungry. Looking at her watch for the first time, the imprisoned girl was amazed to discover that it was after 2 o'clock. If I ever do get out of here alive, George and Bess will skin me alive, she thought with a guilty smile. But if she had only known, Bess Marvin at that moment was frantically trying to save her. Her own skin. She was perched in a tree, a considerable distance from the castle. Surrounded by watchful dogs, she was afraid to descend for fear they might tear her to pieces. In the midst of a state bordering on tears, she was startled to hear whistling. The dogs heard the sound too. They pricked up their ears, then went racing away. Thank goodness, Bess gasped, sliding down from her leafy prison. So much time had elapsed that she decided it would do no good to try to find Nancy and George. Had they not encountered Hector Keep already, they surely would have returned to the parked car. I'll go back there, Bess concluded. But which way did I come, she wondered, helplessly confused. She started off, unwittingly taking a trail leading toward the river. After a long walk, Bess found her way blocked by a crumbling wall. One of the stones had fallen out, creating a perfect peephole. The girl peered through it, hoping to see the road. Instead, she saw the river stretching out below her. On the nearby beach lay a pair of riding breeches. George's clothes, she identified them instantly. There was no sign of either George or Nancy. Bess could not believe that her chums had gone for a swim. My cousin must be in trouble, she concluded in panic. Bess tried to climb the wall, but the stones crumbled beneath her fingers. Once she nearly made it, only to lose her hold and fall. I'll go back to the car, she decided at last. If Nancy and George aren't there, then the only thing to do is to go to River Heights for help. Stumbling through the tall grass, the girl came to a path. By this time she was so beside herself with anxiety, she failed to observe that it had been trampled recently. The trail, Bess soon discovered, did not lead toward the main gate. Instead, she came to a crescent-shaped pond covered thickly with water lilies. Oh, where am I? She asked herself desperately. A stiff breeze was stirring the trees, rustling the leaves and rubbing the branches together. A dead limb came tumbling down. Bess leaped aside, and as she did so, she thought she heard someone call her name. It was just my imagination, she told herself sternly. I must be hearing things. Then the cry came again. Bess! Bess! The girl whirled around. She could see no one. A few yards away stood a stone tool house, its window hidden by overhanging tree branches. Bess! The voice shouted impatiently. Over here in the tool house. This time Bess could not doubt but that it was her cousin who had called her. Hastening to the little building, she looked inside. I thought you never would pay attention to me, George regarded her accusingly. I've been stranded here for hours. Just wait till I get my hands on Nancy Drew. George, where are your clothes? Bess gaped in astonishment. Where are they indeed? I fell into the pond and I had to take off my clothes. Nancy put them on the bank to dry. Then she went to do some exploring. A boy came along and ran away with my things. How terrible. What became of Nancy? I wish I knew. George's sense of resentment vanished. It was replaced by a feeling of anxiety. She's been gone a long while. Perhaps she went back to the car. That's possible, though it's not like Nancy to desert anyone. She knew I'd be waiting here for her. We must hunt for her right away, George. Hector Keep is somewhere on the grounds. Hector Keep here? George echoed in alarm. We must find Nancy and get away before he sees us, but how can I go anywhere this way? Bess slipped off the raincoat she was wearing. Take this, she offered. I don't need it. George put it on and was relieved to find her shoes still lying near the bank of the pond. Bess told her that she had seen the riding breeches down on the beach by the river. Let them stay there for the time being, George decided. Our first job is to find Nancy. The girls waited no longer. Convinced that their chum was not coming, they set off in search of her. Let's go back to the car first, George proposed. She may be waiting there. Without meeting anyone and without being molested by the dogs, the cousins finally got to the front wall and climbed over. Nancy was not in the automobile. Let's drive to town and bring help, Beth said nervously. Drive, did you say? Nancy has the keys to the car. Oh, I'd forgotten. Well, we're in a nice mess. We'll have to find Nancy. That's all there is to it. She must be somewhere inside the estate grounds. Fortifying themselves with sandwiches from the lunch they had brought, the girls started to scale the wall again. On the ledge they hesitated. The dogs had come back and now began to growl menacingly. Maybe if we feed them, George suggested. She hopped down and got 2 sandwiches from the car. At the sight of the food, the hounds became friendly, but the instant they had gobbled it up, they lay on the ground, panting and waiting. Again and again, George tried to descend, but each time the dogs rose menacingly. Bess would not even try. It's no use, she sighed. We may as well wait in the car. This did not please George at all, but try as she might, she could not figure out how to get inside the grounds. The dogs showed no intention to leave. Wherever George went near the wall, they started barking. As an hour elapsed and still another, the afternoon sun slipped lower behind the trees and long shadows darkened the woodland road. Only then did the girls conclude that Nancy must be in serious trouble. Otherwise, she would have returned by this time. We can't sit here and wait another instant, George cried, leaping from the car. Bess, we must do something right away. Bess agreed. I'll go for help, she said. Chapter 12. The Trap Door. For hours, Nancy had refused to acknowledge that there was no means of escape from the tower. She had pried at the door lock with a nail file from her bag. She had tried to break the wooden panels by sheer force, but their strength had defied her. Now she wandered aimlessly about the circular room. She had been without food and water so many hours she began to feel faint. Twice she seriously considered swinging herself over the parapet and making the long drop to the ground, but gave up the idea as foolhardy. I'd be certain to break some bones if I did that, she reasoned. As time dragged by, Nancy grew more and more desperate. She wondered what had become of George, the poor girl, and Bess. What of her? With a feeling of utter dismay, Nancy realized that she had the car keys with her. She certainly had gotten herself and her friends into a dreadful muddle. Nancy sank down on the bottom step of the winding iron staircase to try to figure things out. She stared straight ahead of her. This is the worst trap I've ever been in, she decided unhappily. Suddenly, the distraught girl became aware of something on the floor in front of her, a tiny crack, neatly outlined, a rectangular space about 3 foot square. Speaking of traps, Nancy muttered. Maybe this is a trap door, a chance to escape. Quickly, dropping to her knees, she inspected the crack. Obviously, it marked the outline of an opening, but there was no ring or handle with which to pull up the trap door. Nancy pried at it first with her fingers and then with her nail file. The slender bit of steel snapped in her hands. How can I get it open? She fumed, looking around for something heavier with which to lift it. Not a single object was in the tower. After an hour, Nancy discarded the possibility of this means of escape. The room grew stuffy to her. Or was it because she felt almost ill from lack of nourishment? Her tongue parched and her head aching, she slowly climbed the stairs and went out on the parapet to get some fresh air. The sky became overcast. In a short time it was almost dark. Except for the occasional hoot of an owl and an intermittent croaking of frogs, there was not a sound. Then, suddenly, Nancy became aware of approaching footsteps. Her first impulse was to shout, to make her whereabouts known, as she thought someone had come to rescue her, but intuition warned her to remain silent. Springing to her feet, she looked over the parapet. A man she was sure was a stranger to her was unlocking the door. Far below her, he snapped on a flashlight and entered the tower. Nancy's heart pounded. Should she walk boldly down the stairs and try to bluff her way out? No, I mustn't do that, she decided. If something sinister is going on at Heath Castle, this man probably is involved. She concluded that should he find her, all her chances to help Mrs. Fenimore and Joan would be ruined. Maybe I can get out of here while the man is busy, the girl thought hopefully. He may have opened the trapdoor and gone down below.